It was a warm, balmy Bali day in 2009 when a young 20-year-old woman took a dive into a pool to cool off. In the space of seconds, Rhiannon Tracey's life changed forever, leaving her a quadriplegic. Whilst awaiting her life-saving surgery in Bali, there was a massive earthquake measuring a magnitude of over 7 on the Richter scale. In these terrifying moments where she had no feeling from the neck down and the walls of the hospital were crashing down around her, Rhiannon thought, "This is it, my number is up." But the universe, it seems, had other plans for this remarkable woman. 12 years on, Rhiannon has used this experience to build a not-for-profit organisation called The Next Step to ensure the spinal recovery journey for others is progressive and positive. She shares her mental health journey and how she knows to be kind to herself during the days that are a little harder on her. Breaking down the diversity barriers, coaching through her motivational talks, her passion and determination to live an extraordinary life is truly inspiring. Taking an unfortunate turn of events, finding the positive, and sharing the gift of her journey with others. I loved this interview and I hope you enjoy listening. Welcome to Learning Without Limits podcast series for The Learning Lounge. I'm your host, Melanie Bernicle. This episode, I'm chatting with a businesswoman and motivational speaker whose passion and determination for life is truly inspiring. She's taken an unfortunate turn of events and turned it into a future of positives, and not just only for herself, but for others as well. Please welcome my wonderful guest for today, Rhiannon Tracey. So thank you so much for joining me, Rhiannon.
Thank you for having me, Melanie.
I've really been looking forward to this interview. You've just accomplished so many things. I just want to sort of get a little bit of history on you, like growing up when you were younger, sort of when you were young, what did you see for yourself and where did you think you might have wanted to have been, in your late teens?
Absolutely. Well, I grew up an only child, so I always had a very strong imagination and I was always quite self-sufficient when it come to entertaining myself.
Yes.
I left school at the end of year 10. Every time I put down certain elective subjects, I would never get into them. So I'd become quite frustrated. Animal studies was something that I was continuously putting down and never getting into. And lo and behold, I became a veterinary nurse. So go figure. But
Amazing.
yeah, but I did go down the beauty path. So I left school and became an apprentice hairdresser. And then from that then stemmed into makeup and beauty as well. So things that I absolutely loved. I've always had a bit of a creative background. So I loved being able to accomplish things and overhaul things as well. And just, what's better than glamming someone up and being able to kind of see their reaction as well. So it worked out well because my mum was a wedding and event planner. So we worked side by side. And I dabbled in, managing retail stores and things as well. So I've always been somebody who likes to work amongst people as well. My passion when I always kind of came back to self, animals was something that I knew I always felt really humble around. And I just absolutely loved, being around animals. That always just kind of gave me this sense of peace. So while I was doing, hair and makeup, I was also pooper scooping dog kennels and volunteering at shelters and things like that as well. So, there was definitely a lot of balance there. My friends used to laugh at me because, I'd come off a wedding with my mum and then I'd go into volunteering at a shelter and I'd have a full hair and makeup done and everyone would be like, okay, not the job for you, but I loved it. So, for me, that was just such an amazing experience, being able to study veterinary nursing and work full time. And I really wanted to become a zoologist, and I was quite lucky because just before I became injured and my whole kind of path changed, I had an amazing experience where I got to work with the giraffes as a giraffes keeper at the Melbourne Zoo. So, I definitely felt like animals were where I was going to end up in some capacity.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you can tell that you know how to do your hair, by the way. It looks fantastic. I'm like, give me some more body. And I guess hearing that from you as well, I guess there's always, when you're looking after people in the chair as makeup and hair and beauty, there's a nurturing element. And then with the animals as well, I think I don't know, just for having just met you, I would assume that there's a big part of you that loves to nurture and help other people feel good and help animals, and it's just that ingrained in you.
Absolutely. And I think that's even like translated in, where I'm at now within my own
Mm,
business and things like that. There's always been that huge nurturing aspect. And I know that, when I was an only child, growing up, I was always babysitting and I was always looking after people's dogs or their babies. So,
yeah,
definitely nurturing was something that, is has always been a huge personality trait of mine.
yeah, and that's a really nice thing as well. Really nice thing to have, I think. Animals in nature, it really does something great for the soul.
I remember being in Bali, at a younger age, and we went to, I think we were up in Ubud, and we were doing things with elephants. And my mum used to always say to me, she was like, "You are honestly, as much as you love animals, animals are going to be the thing that like kill you one day." Because I would, be laying on the ground and they would have like elephants like walking over the top of me, and I always just had this trust in animals. I was well aware what could
Yeah,
happen, but I know with me, like I've even since having my injury, I've been in lots of situations where animals could have absolutely have taken me out. But it
yeah.
just, I don't know. I don't know if I'm playing with fire, but I just have this trust. I just know that they know that I'm not going to hurt them, and I expect that back, I guess.
Yeah, it's one of those things I think with animals when you do have that confidence around them, because I used to ride horses a lot. So
Mm,
there was something when you're confident approaching them, there's a different energy. I think that's, in life,
absolutely.
whether it's with animals, with other people, whatever it is, you bring a certain energy
Mm,
and they'll bring a certain energy. And if you can kind of have that energy become synchronized in some way and there's an understanding, it's a
mm,
probably getting a bit deep
absolutely.
on the spiritual
Oh
side
no,
on my end, but
I'm a huge empath, so no, I'm all for the energy of all things.
Rhiannon, you were chatting about Bali. Is Bali a place that you were going to with your family from a young age as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny because my mum's in the process of moving house at the moment, and she's going through all photos, like old photos, and the amount of photos we have of me in Bali just doing random things, and generally often with animals or where animals are concerned. But it was
Yeah.
like a home away from home for me. So it was somewhere that my mum and I would definitely travel every year. So we'd get our tax checks back and we'd get on the phone and call each other and plan our girls' trip.
Oh, I
But we
love that.
had, from going there for so many years, we had this extended family of friends that, we'd always head over there and spend time with. And I just loved everything about Bali. I really enjoyed the culture, the food. The food was amazing. And obviously, like, I'm a girl, I love shopping.
Yeah, huh? Yeah. And so when you were in Bali at the, with when your accident happened, were you there with family at that time or were you over there with friends? Can you sort of talk us through just before the accident?
This particular trip to Bali this year, in 2009, I was there with my mum and my best friend. So, mum and I would generally take it in turns each year of who would bring their friends. So, I was there with my mum, and my best friend. Yeah,
Oh, amazing. And this was you were at 20 at the time, weren't you?
I was. So, 2 months before my 21st birthday.
Oh, wow. So if you don't mind, would you mind like just sort of taking me through, how the accident occurred and, and what had happened?
Sure. So it was much like many of the other days that we'd spent in Bali. It was actually I think it was 2 or 3 days before we were due to come home, and it had been raining all day in Bali. So we had been cooped up for the majority of the day. But it was my best friend's birthday while we were over there. So that particular night we were going on a Bali sunset cruise. So we had all the things I
Oh,
love, like we had the food, the music, you name it. It was amazing. And of course, the world always works in interesting ways because it was the night that we were celebrating her birthday that the accident happened. And side note, everybody generally asks me when I talk about my story, being that we were celebrating that night, is the question I always get is, were you drunk? Were you drinking? The answer is, I wasn't drunk. We had been drinking, but it had been hours before, since I'd had my last drink. So as far as being drunk is concerned, I actually remained fully conscious throughout sustaining my injury up until being in the hospital in Bali. So I remember everything as if it happened yesterday, which, it took a while to kind of work through, but gave me the ability to be able to tell the story often. So we had actually finished up on the cruise and we'd come back to the hotel that Mum and I would generally stay at. We had lots of friends there. The hotel itself had 2 swimming pools. It had like a walkover bridge that divided the 2 pools. So the front swimming pool was the shallow pool and the back swimming pool was the deep pool. It was literally a matter of, we were planning on heading back out. So we'd come back to the hotel, stripped off into our togs, and I had dove into the deep pool. What I had forgotten about this pool was that literally just directly through the center of the swimming pool was deep. So the pool would actually concave down to the center of the pool with the sides being shallow. So when I dove in, I didn't dive far enough into the center of the pool, and I hit my head at the bottom and broke my neck and my back. So I was face down in the water. Felt like forever, but it was just a few minutes before my friends realized that something was up and dove in, or jumped. Well, they didn't dive in, obviously. They jumped in and pulled me out. Like I said, fully conscious. So I was freaking out. I knew instantly that I couldn't move anything. I could feel everything. So, I had that reassurance from them that because they were touching me and I could feel their touch, that my body had obviously gone into shock. I had no idea that I'd broken my neck. I just honestly thought that I hit my head that hard that my body had really just gone into shock. In that moment, I vividly remember that, my mum wasn't with me at that point. She'd gone back to our hotel and, somebody needed to make that phone call that every single parent dreads, that, something pretty horrific had happened to her daughter. And in all the years that Mum and I would go to Bali, we would never get on the back of a motorbike. And the next memory I had was my mum flying into the hotel on the back of a motorbike like Wonder Woman. And I was loaded up into, it was like a beat up panel van because it's Bali, and taken to the Bali International Medical Centre, where I had a CT scan that confirmed that the fragments of my broken vertebrae were wedged into both sides of my spinal cord, and I needed emergency surgery or my spinal cord could be severed. So from that, I was then moved to the Denpasar hospital, and while waiting for emergency surgery, Bali had I think it was a 7.6 magnitude earthquake.
Oh my God.
Pretty much the entire trauma centre where I was waiting was collapsing around us. So my mum was actually like huddled over me, protecting me from everything that was falling down. So I was fairly convinced that night that, I wasn't going to make it. But here I am.
Wow, that's just incredible. Like, to have those 2 occurrences like at the same time. I've got goosebumps up and down my legs, but it's just unfathomable that, you could have 2 unfortunate circumstances at once, but that's, the world and life. And
there were so many bizarre things leading up to having my injury that, if you're a spiritual type of person, my mum and I definitely are. And I think my mum had quite a lot of time to just think about all the things that were happening leading up, and I could go into it, but we'd be here for hours. But, there were a lot of little things leading up to me having my injury that could be a coincidence, or just could be, I guess, warning signs from something. But I definitely think that something was meant to happen.
So you were left, from my understanding, like on the bed while the people were running for cover. Your mum's protecting you, but the other staff had to evacuate. Is that?
That's right.
They were all running. Oh my gosh. And at this time, did they realize like that you had other things going on? Like, did you have water on the lungs at that point, or like due to being underwater for a period of time?
Yeah, so being in the actual trauma centre itself is a bit of a blur for me because I'd had the green stick when I got into the ambulance.
Oh,
So
yep.
I just have kind of flashes of, you know, people running out and my mum being over the top of me. I remember a few years later, I Googled, you know, the earthquake itself, and I actually found a photo of my mum and my best friend, and I think it was a nurse, huddled around my gurney, and just the photos of what remained of the trauma centre. And I was just like, wow, okay. But at that point, I don't
Wow.
think anybody really knew, you know, to what extreme things were with me. At that point, we were just, I guess, basking in the fact that I needed to have emergency surgery, and this was an emergency, and everybody that we needed for this surgery was no longer in the hospital, and the doctor or the surgeon himself who was due to perform the surgery was stuck up in Ubud and couldn't get down. So the surgery ended
Oh,
up happening, I
wow.
think it was about 24 hours later.
So were you frightened at the time, or were you just kind of like, I just need to get this surgery, I need to get the surgery? Like, what was your headspace?
Honestly, I was petrified. I really didn't think that I was going to make it. I do remember people just running around, like it was just frantic. And it was interesting. We had an earthquake here in Melbourne last week, I think it was, and it was a 6. And I barely even felt it. Like I was sitting at my kitchen bench. I think I was drinking a smoothie, and my mum rang me and she was like, "Did you feel that?" Because my mum's traumatized from earthquakes.
Yeah,
I've been
I
in
could
a few.
imagine.
I've been in a few since, because I lived in California for 9 months, so I experienced a few there. But honestly, it was just chaotic, and they're the memories that I have of just everyone being frantic. But then I also remember that, you know, not long after, there was like media and stuff coming in trying to get photos and things like that to, I guess, use me as a story that I'd been injured in an earthquake. Like, you have to imagine Bali's I guess a somewhat of a third world country, and it's very much a money hungry country. So, you know, whatever they could get, they were going to work with. So yeah, it was quite horrific, and I'm glad that I don't remember that crystal clear.
I bet. So how long after were you able to be transported back to Australia?
I had travel insurance, which is definitely the reason why I'm still alive, that's for sure. And I say to everyone, I spent the first 5 years post injury talking to youth and talking to students and year 11 and 12s who are planning schoolies trip. I said, you know, if I can tell you anything, just take that $100 and get travel insurance. Like it will save your life.
Yes.
So I was in the hospital for 2.5 weeks. So there was many communication breakdowns. The travel insurance company were under the impression that the surgery that I had went well. I was able enough to be brought home on a normal flight, but by the time the doctor and the nurse from Australia came over to bring me home, I was literally taking my last breaths. And I remember this crystal clear. So they ordered the hospital to perform a radiograph of my lungs because I couldn't breathe. And the report came back that my lungs were fine, but the Aussie nurse, held the x-ray up and you could see that my lungs were completely black. And she took a photo on her iPhone, sent it back to Australia, and the doctors just went, get her out of there. We need to get her out of there. So there was talks of having a pleural infusion done, but I've caught so many like infections and things like that in the hospital. So basically what had happened is in Australia, they would take out everything that is broken. They'd replace it with titanium. In Bali, they don't have access or the funds for titanium. So they wired me up with stainless steel. So we later found out that my neck wasn't even secure on my head. Both my lungs had collapsed because they hadn't drained my lungs during the surgery. I hadn't moved my bowels for 2.5 weeks.
Oh my God.
I was moved back to the Bali International Medical Centre from Denpasar because it is a Western hospital, and the communication breakdowns were quite extreme. So
Wow.
when they moved me back to the BIMC, it was a matter of trying to clear my bowels because I was obviously quite ill because I hadn't used my bowels for 2.5 weeks, and to get me, I guess, well enough to send me home on an air ambulance. So that happened. But as I was being put onto the air ambulance, I was given an antibiotic that turned out I was allergic to, and I went into anaphylaxis. So I should have been put into an induced coma for the flight home. And I wasn't. And I also had a huge fear of flying before this happened. So it was, I know, have no fears now. Definitely not of flying. I'm actually dating a pilot who's like, come on, let's I want to put you in my plane. I'm like, okay, can do anything now. But yeah, so it was quite an ordeal. So very, very lucky to be here, and very thankful, to have made it just through the ordeal of Bali. And I felt, I guess, once I got to Australia, I felt somewhat of a reassurance that things would be better, or everything would be fine once I got to Australia, not knowing the severity of my injuries at that point, because whenever I was asking questions in Indonesia, in Bali, I was always getting very mixed messages. So, I was asking, will I walk again? And it was, smile through your heart. And I'm not kidding. Like, that's literally what I was being told. So there was never a clear yes or no, and I was longing for the yes or no's.
You're one brave woman. I think I would have been having a breakdown.
Well, I definitely was, but I guess, the brunt of it was coming back to Australia. I was told that I now needed 3 surgeries to correct what Bali had attempted to fix, which meant causing more trauma around my spinal cord. And just to familiarize yourself with spinal cord injury. So the brain and the spinal cord work together to make everything in your body function. And when an injury occurs, it creates a traffic jam. So, at this point, I was completely paralyzed from my neck down. And people meet me now, and when I tell my story, they're like, oh, you can move your hands and you can do this. I'm actually quadriplegic. So I broke my C5 vertebrae. So I'm what's considered an incomplete quadriplegic. And I guess one thing I can say is, initially there was a huge risk of having my spinal cord severed, which is why they wanted to operate on me in Bali. And to this day, I am grateful. I'm the type of person that finds a positive in every negative. So I am grateful to an extent that I was operated on, because my spinal cord is still attached. And I have what's now considered as an incomplete injury, which means that I do have nerve regeneration. Like, the spinal cord itself can't regenerate, but everything around it does. So as time progressed and the more work I did have natural recovery, and I present as a paraplegic unless you really know spinal cord injury well and you look at different parts of my body and you're like, oh, okay, well, that's how you're a quad and things like that. But bearing in mind, I was completely paralyzed from the neck down. So I couldn't feed myself. I literally couldn't move. So being told that I needed extra surgery and I was at more risk of losing even more feeling and sensation and movement, like, at this point I had none.
Wow.
So I was just like, something's got to give, but you've got to do what you've got to do. And my family were being told that, if I survived the first 24 hours of just being back in Australia and being in the ICU unit, that they should feel, I guess, happy to some extent. So.
My goodness. Can I ask, like, when they sort of went through the process of, like, you being able to, create those, I guess, the extension of the neural pathways and being able to do, like, how long a process is that from being pretty much, not being able to move to then having the sensation, and how long did that process take to, because now I did realize 2 years later you could stand for periods of time, but from being completely paralyzed from the neck down, how long was it before you were able to just do even some of the small things?
So about 2 months into my injury, so once going through the additional surgeries, being in ICU and then being put on the acute ward at the Austin Hospital here in Victoria. I think it was about 2 months into my injury that I started moving my left toe. Now, when I say moving, I would think about moving it and would move a couple of minutes later. And that's where I talk about the traffic jam. So, you would think of doing things and it would actually take a while to process. So by the time you're not thinking about it anymore is when it happens. And that was written off quite often as an involuntary spasm by doctors, which was very frustrating. And I still hear that to this day. But it was about 2 months later. And for me, my toe was the furthest thing away from my brain. So I was like, if I can make that move, then I need to find a way to put the jigsaw puzzle together. And my mum was Googling, reading, watching every video. She was just like, she became the encyclopedia of spinal cord injury recovery. If it was out there, she found it.
Yeah.
And, she was just constantly, on the phone or, over my bed saying, as soon as we get out of here, we're going to go and we're going to do this and we're going to do this. And, she was always, for me, it was really interesting because it wouldn't matter what the doctors would tell me, which was often quite without hope. I don't want to say it was negative, but there was never, I think when you're so vulnerable, you want something to hang on to. And I just couldn't get that something from the medical professionals, not begrudging them because they got to do what they've got to do. But when my mum would come into my room and she would talk to me, she gave me the hope that I needed. Or, she was showing me videos and photos and reading me stories of all these people that were doing incredible things. And she was like, well, if they can do them, you can do them.
I love that.
Yeah, she was definitely the one instilling the hope.
Thinking back, would you say that your mum was probably the biggest part of your mental health journey by giving you that hope?
I think she still is. In a good way and a negative way, absolutely. Look, she would be in my hospital room for 12 hours pepping me up. And unfortunately for her, my mother is a smoker and her smoking got a lot worse post-injury. So she would duck out to have a cigarette. And in that time, a nurse would come in and just completely deflate my attitude. And she would just come in and just be like, oh my gosh, I've just spent 12 hours in here, trying to pep her up. So my mum definitely got to the point where I think at one point she even put a sign on the door and it just said, like, if you're coming in here with like anything negative to say, don't come in. And she was known throughout the hospital as the pain in the ass mother because she would literally stop people from coming in to my room if she knew that they, weren't going to give me what I needed in that time.
Like, was there any time when your mental, like just the downside of it really got to you?
Absolutely. And that's something that I really try and talk about often because, again, like I present as quite a positive person. I'm 12 years post-injury now. So how I make it through a bad day now is so different to, even 5 years ago. I think for the first 5 years of my injury, Mum and I would refer to them as bad spinal cord injury days. And there'd be days where I would literally just say, like, I hate having this injury. And I still do hate having this injury. But, early on throughout the first, I guess, year of having this injury, those bad days would have me saying, Mum, like, I just don't want to be here anymore. And she got to the point where she was like, well, if you don't want to be here, I'm going with you. And she'd actually like reverse psychology me and make me feel really guilty. And she was really good at that. My mum was such a tough love type of woman. And I definitely get that from her now as a life coach. But I had more days. I did have a lot more negative days than positive days. Whereas now, like I said, I've very much learnt how to implement tools to get me through those days much more positively.
Do you experience with where you're at now much pain, like physical pain with anything, with unusual nerve sensations, or like when you have a bad day now, like is it a pain related or is it a frustration level? Sometimes you're wanting to do something or...
I think physically and mentally, yes. It's interesting because I remember saying to my partner, funnily enough, on our first date, he asked that question. And I said, no, I don't really get pain because I associate pain because of my injury with having nerve pain, which a lot of people have with this injury. And thankfully, it's not something that I experience. But going through COVID, like, okay, Melbourne's been the most locked down state in the world, has made me realize by not having the access to the things that I usually would have to keep me moving has completely shut my body down. So I have experienced, it's more so muscle pain. Like, I overcompensate in so many ways with my body, trying to do things that an able-bodied person would do. And I'm a very brutally independent person. So I'm that girl that when somebody offers help, I'm like, no, and then I pay for it later with pain. So, look, it's been very interesting, this COVID thing, because I've had to acknowledge that I can't do everything, and able-bodied people can't either. So that's where I have to keep coming back down to. And now I implement more things to kind of, more rest days, or, after 12 years of pretty much not having a carer or a support person, I've now got somebody that comes into my house 2 days a week and, does things for me to just allow me to rest, because I do wear so many hats and I do a lot of things that play havoc on my body. So, I think it's been an interesting, I'm going to say 18 months, because it's definitely made me look into how I care for my body differently. Like, for 12 years, I've been like my body first. Now I'm my mind, my body. What I started to acknowledge was that, there are days where my injury influences how I function. So, even though I'm very independent and there's really not much I can do besides run, there are a lot of things to do with this injury that dictate my capabilities. So I already miss out on things because of my injury. So if I can control the pain aspect, then I'm going to implement something to ensure that, like, if today's a bad day, I'm going to implement something that's easy that will make tomorrow a better day. So, like, for me, my carer is here today. She's out there chopping vegetables and things like that to ensure that I eat good today so that tomorrow is a better day, So
that sounds all right for me.
I mean, like, we can only control what we can control. And I've definitely learnt that the hard way.
And then, so Rhiannon, knowing that, like, the support that you've had over the years to, physically be able to get you to an amazing point where you're at and to do all these different things, is that why you brought about your business and that you implemented with your mum, so that people could get the right care through the next step sooner rather than later in their rehabilitation spinal cord injury journey?
It was all about having options, which I always say to this day, all I wanted to do when I had this injury, besides obviously walk, everybody who's injured wants to walk at the start. And that whole journey is a process within itself and a conversation within itself. But when I was injured, there was just no options for somebody who wanted to improve. We were so easily written off by the doctors, not so much the nurses, but more so the doctors. It was kind of like, once you become an outpatient, what you do is up to you. And, within the hospital, there were classes like wheelchair skills, which I refused to go to, which now I'm like, why didn't I go to? Because to this day, I can't even like get down a gutter on my own, but that's okay. It means I have to talk to people and ask for help, which has always been an issue for me, like I said. But, it was... When I mentioned earlier that my mum was, sourcing all of this information, that was hours of work within itself that she could have been, having her own self-care implementations as well. So the fact that we had to find things that didn't exist within our own country, given how far advanced our medical system was just very bizarre. And as we started dipping our toes into this world, it became apparent why we didn't have these things. And the reality was the red tape. And like I said, I lived in America for 9 months after having my injury because there was nothing available for somebody who wanted to. I'm going to say initially it was to walk again, because that was my goal. I didn't fathom anything in between. It was as I was starting to reach milestones, I was starting to see the importance of these little things, like being able to go to the bathroom on my own, or being able to, brush my teeth, or just look after myself as a 21-year-old. I spent my 21st birthday in hospital. So just being able to take care of myself, when I was able to do that, it was like, oh, okay. And as the years rolled on, it was like, oh, maybe walking isn't the be all and end all, because if I'm putting all my energy into walking, I'm actually not living. And that's what it came down to. So we found this incredible facility in America that really what it came down to was, instead of being treated as disabled, I was being treated as injured.
Yes.
And when I'd ask questions, instead of the no, it was the, well, maybe, and it was such a mindset shift, being amongst people who had a positive energy and they all had goals. Whereas in the hospital, it was, there was no talk. Like, the goal setting was, coming out of hospital and getting home. Whereas for me, being in hospital for my 21st birthday, I received 2 letters from Vic Roads, one saying, you've got your full license now that you're 21, and another one saying, we're suspending your license indefinitely because of your injury. So for me, I was like, well, that's a goal. I don't want to not be able to drive. Put those 2 letters, Mum, on my pinboard in front of my bed, because there's my goals, So
great.
It was it was providing options for, different goals that we could potentially reach, but also having me physically being treated as injured, not wrapped up in cotton wool, not just having, my arms moved up and down. Because my question so often during physio sessions here in Australia was, why aren't you moving my legs? And the response that I was getting was, well, because they're not doing anything. And I was like, well, isn't that more of a reason to move them? And this is somebody who I had absolutely no idea about fitness or anything like that. I was not an active girl per se. And now, when I hear people say, if you don't move it, you lose it, I'm like, actually, that's the truth, because it wasn't rocket science what we were having access to in America. So we knew we needed to bring something over here, because we were meeting hundreds of Aussie families that, had small children that were having to fundraise like we had to, because my injury was in Bali, no compensation here, no NDIS at that point. So, people that were fundraising to access these therapies in America, we were just like, nah, this is ridiculous. So we kind of bound together with all these people that we were meeting and said, all right, well, how do we do this in Australia? And at that point, we were really like clutching at straws. We had nothing. We had nothing left financially because, again, non-compensated injury. But we had our community. And even though physically I had no movement, I had my voice. And my voice has been, I guess, my stepping stone to move this community forward when it comes to disability and spinal cord injury recovery.
You haven't been frightened to sort of come forward, and the fact that you're really open and honest about, the mental health stuff's there, the physical stuff's there, and and it's like life in general is always a work in progress, from when we start to when we finish. But I think giving yourself that voice, is so empowering to so many different people going through many different things in life. And the fact that, you've had your mum just that main support, and now you're supporting other people. Like, these people that you're bringing through the next step are so lucky that you've experienced this, and then you can be that positive voice that enables them to open their mind to the possibilities.
I mean, this injury and what's available for this injury is so further advanced now than what it was 12 years ago. We're at a point now where stem cells are looking like an option here in Australia, and never in my lifetime did I think that a cure would be available potentially for this injury, and we're definitely heading towards that direction. But you know, in the early days, everybody said to me, everything happens for a reason. And I was like, you know what? You are lucky I'm paralyzed, because I definitely want to severe tackle you. But I do think, like I said earlier, something was going to happen. And I'm a firm believer, like, you know, we all believe in something, you know, and something different. But I'm a firm believer in the fact that this happened to me for a reason. You know, I was never going to just kind of sit silently. And even on my dark days that we spoke about earlier, I was one person on a ward of 20 at some stages that was the only one that was, you know, proactive in fighting physiotherapists for more, you know, physio time and things like that. I was never just going to literally sit, you know, and that's, you know, the last 12 years has happened because of that. So I guess I've always had the tenacity of, I don't know if it's whether I've had the tenacity or I've just never really worked well with the word no. My mum would always say, you know, you never took no well. Every time I told you no, you know, you were like, oh, that was your motivation. Like, well, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's definitely transpired into something great as an adult versus as a teenager. But yeah, something was definitely meant to happen for me to be able to turn my pain into a purpose. And in saying that, I share my story and I use my voice now, not just within the disability community, but to everyone, because I think it shouldn't have to take something horrific or traumatic to make a shift within our lives for us to realize our potential. But unfortunately, that is the case. You know, you could use COVID as an example. But even as somebody with a spinal cord injury, I've gone through so many things. Like, I've gone through a terrible marriage breakdown. Like, I've experienced things that able-bodied people have experienced that have been grief-stricken, that have even changed aspects of my life, you know, in amongst that as well. So again, like, we've all got a purpose. It's about, you know, igniting it.
I think the diversity and the inclusion factor with what's been going on globally for the last couple of years is really pushing the boundaries so that there's not a certain stereotype doing a runway. There's not a certain stereotype, you know, doing a particular job. Like, it's opening us up to so many things. And seeing that you did Melbourne Fashion Festival, like Melbourne Fashion Week, I love that. And that's how it should be. I think when people see someone out there that they can relate to on different levels, whether it's an emotional level, a physical level, there's something so empowering in that. And we're seeing the changes globally. Is this something that you think that you'll want to have a presence in and be doing stuff like this because it's important for other people to see the diversity and the inclusion factor?
Look, I honestly believe that you just don't know what you don't know. And all of the things that I do now, I do literally because, no pun intended, but I've fallen into them. And when I say that, I mean, you know, being a model and a public speaker and things like that, they were never things that were on my bucket list for life. It was a matter of, you know, I was out doing things within the community, or I was having conversations with people, and everybody was coming back to this, well, it doesn't exist. And I guess it was the same as, you know, access to rehab when I was injured. And I was like, well, if it doesn't exist, we need to find a way to create it. And I think that for me, that's definitely been a huge eye-opener for me, because had I have not been injured or disabled, I wouldn't know that, you know, there was no inclusion within, you know, fashion, media, you name it, pretty much everything that exists. And that just really annoys me, because when I talk about the fact that I've gone through things that an able-bodied person goes through, I'm like, well, there's the equality right there. You and I, we're not different. So why are we being treated differently in different industries? You know, that doesn't make sense. I'm a female. Yes, I'm in a wheelchair, but I still wear clothes, and I still, enjoy going out. And I actually don't understand why, if somebody's building a new building, why they're putting stairs when not everybody can use stairs, but everybody can walk up a ramp, or anybody can use an elevator. So, you know, I guess I was just becoming more aware of these things as I was experiencing them myself or having these conversations. And honestly, like, the fuel behind everything I do is because it just pisses me off. Like, I just can't, I can't fathom how something that could be potentially so easy is so overlooked. And even where I sit today, you know, I'm still quite pissed off and frustrated that in the last 2 years we've seen all these movements happen, but disability still sits silently in the background, where people are literally missing out on opportunities because there's no access. Like, it just does not make sense. So, and like, there's a different perspective around a lot of things as well, and I guess an able-body's perspective on what's accessible versus what is actually accessible if you're disabled are two very, very different things too. But I guess for me, I'm somebody who's had both lives. I've been an able-bodied woman and now I'm a disabled woman, so I understand, I guess, the ignorance behind access and inclusion, and I respect it. But now I'm a disabled woman who's ready to educate people on how simple it is to have equality within any organisation or industry, because people are missing out. Disabled people are missing out, but also these industries are missing out as well.
I think that's, Rhiannon, I think that's some great points that you've definitely like put together. And I think just having that diversity and equality really is just so important for everyone to see. And I think you're doing an amazing job and an inspiring one at that. Can I ask you, sort of jumping topics a little bit, when setting up your business, can I ask from a business point of view, like, you've not, you know, obviously your mum had her events business and you were working with her at a younger age, but when you're starting a non-for-profit, that's a massive, you know, a lot of paperwork to get through within itself. And then to be able to start something that's helping other people, like, where did you even start mentally when it comes to business, getting that one off the ground?
So I am professional at calling people in with skill sets that I don't have. So I'm a great delegator. And I think I get that from my mum as well. My mum's always been quite business savvy. She's an accountant, so that's her background. So she's always been great with numbers, but also my family had been involved in a go-kart club, which was an incorporated association. So my stepdad was the president of that go-kart club. So he had the knowledge of how to set up an incorporated association. My mum had the numbers, and then we just literally pulled in whomever we needed to be able to assist us and guide us. So we literally put a shout out into the media and said, this is what we want to do. Meet us at this time at this place if you want to be involved, both spinal cord injured or not. And I think we had over 100 people end up at that location. And
wow.
I know, it was amazing. And from that 100 people, there was our membership base for our incorporated association. And then it was creating, you know, the fundamentals that we needed, both to set up the business, but also to have the expertise within the facility once the facility opened. It took us almost 3 years. So we also did this without any funds behind us. Like, there was no capital. Everything was literally fundraised from the ground up. It got to a point where when we did finally open, my family remortgaged their home a couple of times to pay the wages of our staff, because we knew we were going to get a break. You know, we knew that there was a need for this, and even to this day, like, I still have conversations with my staff. I remember, like, I used the start of COVID for an example, where businesses were freaking out and they were letting staff go because they didn't know what was going to happen. They were going to have to close their doors. Whereas I was just like, we'll be okay. And everyone was like, how do you know? I'm like, I just know, you know, like, I just know because what we've created has been needed. You know, there's a need for it. And it was always going to be hard. Like, you know, that's why it hadn't been done. But I knew that there was going to be something that was going to help guide us through this. And it has. And, you know, we've been open for, I think it's 8 years now. And I have the most incredible team of staff. I've been able to step away and not be there, you know, 5 days a week to run it. And it really is like, you know, it has been a struggle with COVID, because even though as an essential service, a huge majority of our clientele is the elderly, and they literally don't want to leave their homes out of the fear of catching this virus. But we've been able to just move through it together. And I think it really has, quite like my veterinary nursing years, it's been on the job training. It really has. Like, I think the struggles that I've been hit with have forced me to go out and seek the knowledge that I needed to move forward. And I still have moments where I scratch my head and I'm just like, I have no idea how we did this. Like, no idea. But at the same time, I'm like, well, of course we did it, because we had the passion. Like, we had the need. There was a need for this. And I guess the more kind of great stories that have come out of my facility, you know, all these, I don't call them like our clients. I don't call clients. I don't call them patients. We call them athletes, because the next step is a whole body holistic approach to recovery. The more milestones they're reaching, you know, the more people are seeing that. And like, there's just so much proof out there that options create further abilities. And for me, you know, if I can just see one of my athletes smile each day, that's one more smile than what I saw when I was laying in that hospital bed or pushing up the hallways of the hospital. You know, it's a positive environment. It's just something that we needed.
For anyone out there who's, you know, starting a business and doing anything, is there one particular moment that you remember that you just think, wow, and you really had to think, okay, how are we going to get through? And is there anything that you could talk about to sort of, you know, talking about that resilience mindset of, okay, this is how we did it?
I think as human beings, one of our biggest struggles, and I'll always come back to this because I know for me, as I've mentioned a few times, is the ability to ask for help. And being a not-for-profit organisation without any funding capacity behind us, and then also servicing a community that is so small but exists. We literally had many times within the first 2 years of being operational where we came so close to closing the doors. And it was, I guess, being able to brush off the ego and actually going out into the community and the media and saying, look, this is why we need this place to stay open. Here's the stories. Here's the achievements. You know, as we were contemplating closing the doors, we'd had a little boy who, I think he was 9 years old when he took his first steps because he had spina bifida. You know what I mean? So stories like that, that we were like, this is what's happening. Like, tell me we don't need this. We need your support. And I guess the difference between my organization and many not-for-profits out there is that you could physically see where your money was going. So even to this day, we have what we call an athlete scholarship program where somebody can actually donate funds to our organization to support an athlete who is uncompensated throughout their recovery. So they're literally a part of the recovery journey of the person that they're sponsoring as such, so they can watch that process unfold. They get to see the milestones and, what's most importantly, the mental changes. You know, the majority of our clientele are young guys who have had motorcycle accidents or motor accidents as such, and they come in and they're completely withdrawn from the world. They're frustrated, they're angry, and then they go off to have, like, one in particular who's a great friend of mine. He's got a son now, you know, he's got a beautiful partner. He started a tattoo apprenticeship and he's now, you know, an amazing tattoo artist. So, you know, now where I sit within recovery to where I was 12 years ago, and this is how I educate people who are newly injured, recovery does not just mean walking. It is having the ability to improve your quality of life. And I think there's a big difference between having a life and living a life. And that's what I strive to help people achieve, whether able-bodied or not, is having a life, living that life.
I think that's just such a beautiful way to want to live your life as well, because when you're doing that for people, I just had like all goosies when you were saying that on my legs, and it's just, you're right. So many people just get stuck in the doing and then living this life, and there's so much more to it. Like exactly what you're saying, I just can't agree more. And for people who have been able-bodied and then having to go through that mental trauma and then bringing them out the other side, what you're doing for people is remarkable. But then people like myself who aren't injured and just looking at this going, well, I can step up. I can, I can get my head around other things. And it's really inspirational, I think, for so many people on so many levels, and seeing people come together to fundraise and then get behind what you're doing as well must just be something that's really nice, because you believe in it and you're showing the difference that it makes. And do you find that you get a lot of inspiration from the people coming through your program as well?
I mean, I literally just wrote a piece on the word inspiring, and just how, going back to speaking about perception before, just how loosely the word inspiring or inspired is used. Because when somebody says to me, you're inspiring, I'm like, well, I'm playing the cards I was dealt with. For me, I couldn't see me doing anything else, but that's my point of view on things. But when you speak to people in the disability community, the word inspiring really kind of hits a nerve, because you hear people say, oh, it's really inspiring that, she went to her formal, or she's doing this, or that they're doing this. And we come back to, well, wouldn't you be doing that? Like, if you're able-bodied, like how are we different? What, because we're disabled and you're not? Like, that's inspiring. But for me, watching my athletes every day, I wouldn't say it inspires me, but it definitely drives my determination. So, during those days where there were conversations about closing the doors, I was like, okay, but if we close the doors, these people literally will have nowhere to go. Like, we will go back to having to fundraise. Like, if we're not fundraising for the next step, we're fundraising for people to go overseas. Like, wouldn't we want to keep our money in our country, these people in their safety and comfort of their own homes? So, for me, they just, every single one of them just really drives me to do better. And you can really have, excuse my French, a really shitty day, and then you can see what happens in the next step, and you're like, okay, my day's not so bad. You know what I mean? So, it is, for me, it's just given me a reason every single day to get out of bed and do better.
Gosh, well, I think after watching this, I think a lot of people are going to be wanting to get out of bed and do better, because it's just, it is. It's just such a great journey that you've been on to sort of see where you're at, and just what you're doing for other people is just beautiful. And it's been an absolute privilege to have a chat with you, and hopefully we get to play makeups one day.
Yes, I'd love that.
Oh gosh. But Rhiannon, thank you so much for sharing your journey, because I think, it's a beautiful one, and it is a real privilege to sort of sit here and have a chat with you. And it's been amazing.
Thank you so much, Melanie.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of Learning Without Limits for the Learning Lounge. I'm Melanie Vernicle. See you next time.